I hope you enjoyed the first half of this morning. We've had a lot of insights, a lot of interesting topics. We'll continue building on those discussions. Later at the Q&A session, we'll also try to squeeze in some questions for our previous presenters. So save your questions. So allow me to invite my panelists from different institutions. We mainly will be focusing on the Ethiopian context, but we'll also try to mix it up with our neighbors' Kenyan experience as well, just to highlight on a few topics. So first off, let me introduce Muhidin Shifa. Muhidin is a principal financial inclusion, financial education, and consumer protection officer at the National Bank. So he had a number of years of experience in all these areas, including insurance as well. So today he will take us through the Consumer Protection Directive and maybe their thinking and their plans going forward. So Muhidin, join me on the stage, please. Second, I will call Francis. Actually, Rafe earlier gave a very good introduction to Francis' background and experiences. So I'll not introduce him again, but I'll just invite Francis to the stage again. The third panelist is Mesfin. Mesfin is a lawyer by trade. So Mesfin is a principal attorney at Mesfin Tafesse and Associates. He specializes on contract areas and also focuses on banking and insurance, among other practices. So allow me to call Mesfin on the stage. The last panelist I'm inviting is Kebron. Kebron comes from the private sector. Maybe we wanted to also include the private sector in this discussion, see what opportunities and challenges there are in this area for the private sector as well. So Kebron considers himself, and of course his experience has shown, he is a very serial entrepreneur who has provided the government of Ethiopia with a lot of software infrastructures and platforms that are behind some of identity-related services of the government, like, for example, the passport, document authentication, and so on. So allow me to call Kebron to the stage again. Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on the stage. So my first question, I'll simply keep it general, and then maybe allow all of you a turn. So we have seen some of the excitement from the morning discussions and what all those things bring to Ethiopia as well. So we see an uptake in digital finance in Ethiopia in general. So we anticipate a lot of growth in this space. So for you, maybe, and for the organization you represent, what does this uptake, this potential growth represent? So what excites you in this journey?
Thank you, Abel, for your introduction. I excited because of the fact that we have seen, a huge improvement in digital finance in Ethiopia, and I'm also excited because of the fact that the National Bank has contributed a lot in, allowing the telecom sector and non-bank financial institutions to deliver digital financial services. And it is true that more than 30% of the Ethiopian population is the young and who are savvy to digital technologies, and seeing this young population to take advantage of digital financial services is an excitement to me. And the increased application of use cases also contributes huge in the uptake. And also the interconnectedness and interoperability among the platforms and financial institutions is also a huge impression to me to see how digital finance is increasing day by day today in Ethiopia.
So maybe if I take this question to Kebron, you have been trying to introduce different digital platforms in Ethiopia, maybe from the identity perspective. So what does this new improvement, new uptake, new growth represent for you personally and for your business?
So Ethiopia is a market that's not even touched, or some people call it's green, but it's not even green yet. We just planted the grass for it to be green. So the opportunity here is just humongous. The volume is there, the knowledge is there, the approach is there, the willingness from this government is opening up the technology. And for us, is as a new technology, as a new patented solution, a market like this is much easier to penetrate and set the rules and set the agenda and be an example that Ethiopia can also generate some real revenue in this with the technology opportunity. And all I can emphasize on is the volume is here, whether it's payment, whether it's government service, whether it's healthcare, across the board, the volume is here. So it's kind of exciting for us.
Thank you, Kebron. Maybe I'll restructure my flow, maybe to allow Muhidin to take one or two questions, and then I'll come back to you all. I have actually a whole lot of questions, if I'm allowed to keep you all for myself here. So coming to Muhidin, maybe following all the developments we have seen in the past few years in the digital space, with publication of the PII regulation, the PSO regulation, and all other regulatory and policy interventions that have come around this time. NB has also issued one of the directives, the Consumer Protection Directive. So maybe if you could tell us, the idea, the objective behind that, and maybe what the priorities are within that for the NB.
The ultimate objective or responsibility for the NB is to ensure the trust and confidence of the consumers in the financial system. And there is also an emerging objective that, gaining the attention of the National Bank is to promote financial inclusion in Ethiopia. And to this also the National Bank strives to promote, innovations and new products and services into the system. So to achieve these objectives, the NB should address, the vulnerabilities and the risks associated with these products. So one area that we are looking is the problem of information asymmetry, because there is a huge literacy gap, particularly digital financial services concerned. And we also understand that there is a lack of information and transparency on some of the financial institutions. So we have to address these issues, and we also make sure that consumers are heard about their complaints. So the way how fast these complaints are addressed is matter most to the consumers. Otherwise, it will affect the usage and have also a spillover effect on potential consumers that aim to enter into the financial system. So this concerns calls for the NB to issue a consumer protection framework covering the transparency, the fairness issues, the data protection, and the compliant handling procedures, so that these procedures should be convenient, inexpensive, and just for all consumers to as long as they have a relationship with the financial institutions. Otherwise, these issues are not addressed. It will have, a negative effect on their, financial health if the consumers are, stolen of their funds from their accounts, or maybe they may be vulnerable to loss of their data, which is in the hands of the financial institutions, and they are, vulnerable for hidden costs and charges. So we have to address all these issues separate from the prudential aspect of the regulator. That is the concern the NAB is addressing in the existing Financial Consumer Protection Directive.
So, yeah, this is actually a very important piece of regulation in this area. But we also know, there are different regulatory policy and proclamation as well in this area. And in terms of responsibilities as well, we have some overlapping, seemingly overlapping entities in this area. For example, we have the Consumer Protection Directive from NBE. We have the e-transaction proclamation that is giving some responsibility to Mint as well. We also have the Trade Competition and Consumer Protection Authority as well. The kind of share some kind of responsibility in general around consumer protection. So how do you see this different piece of regulation and the entities themselves working together in harmony?
Yeah, you are right, Abel. As far as the mandate for consumer protection of financial services is concerned, the NEB has got a clear mandate in its recently amended proclamations. We have, sector-specific proclamations with respect to insurance sector, banking sector, and microfinance sector. So we have clearly indicated the provisions for conducting market conduct and consumer protection supervision. Because this financial sector is very specialized, so it's difficult for the General Consumer Protection Authority to deal with these issues, and the government recognized this fact that financial institutions should be regulated and supervised by the National Bank for consumer protection purposes. So we have, providing the different directives. For example, we have issued the consumer protection directives covering the areas that I mentioned earlier. So the only thing that we are, waiting for is the institutional arrangements, the logistics, the capacity building to start full implementation of the directives. But as far as this consumer protection directive, practices are concerned, I understand that a cooperation and a collaboration between different institutions should be, undertaken because it's a cross-sectorial issue. So we may collaborate on information sharing. We may collaborate on, for example, the compliant handling issues. For the Consumer Protection Authority has experience on how to handle a complaint from a particular consumer. So they can have some, development of experiences. So you can leverage on that. And so this can be done through a memorandum of understanding between these financial institutions and the public institutions. And the collaboration should also be made within the different departments of the central bank as well. There are, prudential regulators within the central bank. So they have, a responsibility to supervise banks from prudential aspects. So they have a lot of information about financial institutions practice. So we need that information. So information sharing is also another area that we can collaborate within the central bank and intra-institution. This is what I can say about collaboration.
Thank you, Muhidin. Maybe if I could take this question to Mesfin, maybe from a legal perspective, how do you see this different piece of regulations, policy, and proclamations being distributed across different entities, working effectively?
Currently, in 2013, government took a policy and established what is known as Trade Competition and Consumer Protection Policy institution, the authority. You mentioned it in passing, but if you see, that authority is no longer there. The latest government reorganization has eliminated the competition authority and reduced it to a unit in the Ministry of Trade and Regional Integration. That's, I don't know if there are policymakers in the room, is really a wrong step to take. As it stands today, you don't have a focused institution. I remember taking a client, lawyer, who used to work in the UK and Singapore on competition matters. And when she looked at TCCPA, Trade Competition and Consumer Protection Authority, back in 2013, 2015, she said, well, it's promising, it's going to grow in the future. And of course, it was part of, COMESA, its staff took so many training. Now, all of a sudden, it's no longer there. It's unfortunate. So you have also, if you look at, there is a complementarity between consumer protection policy and competition policy. And the institution should be there. So I would start with that broader. But if you look at the current normative and institutional framework, you find probably Ministry of Trade and Regional Integration, as I said, Ministry of Innovation and Technology, basically power emanating from Electronic Transaction Proclamation, number 1205, 2020. And you have Ethiopian Communication Authority, which has also broad powers. And you have the National Bank of Ethiopia, basically financial services. And you have the Attorney General. The Attorney General has a lot of powers in terms of protecting consumers. And you have the Information Network Security Agency as well. All of these institutions, it appears, first, the laws, when they are made in a very piecemeal fashion. You see duplications of provisions and the duplication of authorities. So all of them have, if you look at the laws, all of them have a section dealing with consumer protection. So the question for me is, to what extent these initiatives, these provisions could be harmonized, and a good institution can be created to really implement those very nicely worded protective provisions in these laws.
If I take this question to Francis, maybe you have done this from setting up the competition authority itself all the way up to advising and consulting on this topic across Africa, right? So maybe what advice you have for us in terms of what should be our priorities at this point? And also, if you could comment on whether the need to streamline this type of different piece of regulation as well as responsibilities.
Yeah. Thanks, Abel. Whom do I send the invoice to after the advice? Thank you. And let me share what happened in Kenya and what I've seen happening in the other countries to make what I may call an effective and flexible regulatory regime, both, and I agree with you, there's complementarity between competition and consumer protection. Kenya in 2002, after the change of government regime, the new government came up with an economic recovery strategy, which it laid its intent to make the economy recover and make Kenya a competitive hub. I'm happy to hear that there's intent by the Ethiopian government in terms of improving the digital economy. But intent does not just stop there. There are some initiatives and interventions you have to take. And one of the initiatives is to ensure that you have credible and competent institutions to support the economic road you are undertaking. And when I talk about credible and effective institution, is to have a regulatory framework which is appreciative of the economic road you are taking. Number two, a regulatory framework is not adequate it is the person in terms of human capacity of driving that regulatory framework. And that regulatory framework should be harmonized, as my friend has indicated here, because you might have so many disparate pieces of legislation, not only causes forum shopping, but also causes regulators' competition rather than regulators' convergence of objective. And the economic recovery strategy of Kenya wanted to converge the objectives of regulators. So I would advise that we really need to look at the current regulatory dispensations in terms of the institutions and see how we can converge and even collapse some and ensure that they are focused on what their mandate is. The number two is that where are they placed? In which ministry? It's no secret that some ministries are more visible, to use better terms, than the other ministries. The Kenya Competition Authority, which regulates competition and consumer protection, was placed in the National Treasury on the basis that it cuts across all the sectors, not just the trade. And therefore, when you're placed at that national, is that you're driving the economy of the country, not just a service or a trade in the country. But doesn't mean that we don't need the sector regulators. Sector regulators, they may focus on utilities where markets are non-contestable, but also where markets are being liberalized, like in the telecoms. But when you create these sector regulators, you have to create a framework of them interfacing, but also one having the primary jurisdiction where this is the final decision maker. And the way of interfacing, it's one, memorandum of understandings. Two, is that how do you share information? And three, how do you conduct activities together so that you cannot have regulatory fatigue when all people are focusing on the regulated? That is how I would advise them. The other issue is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we can increase the speed of the wheel by sharing our experiences and seeking advice from other people who have done it in Africa and participating in those international forums. But what I can see, there's great potential in Ethiopia, 120 million people, an expansive country. Digital economy is the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francis. As you have heard across all the three panelists, I mean, the way to go is collaboration and coming together, creating a platform where they can all work together while not creating the redundancy or overburdening of the entity that is being regulated, right? So maybe if we could step a little bit out of the regulatory and policy discussion and go to Kebron. Earlier polls in the morning, we saw identity theft, data protection. Some of the things that were coming up in the survey. So, are there any specific threats, any risk, any trends that are being observed in this area? And maybe if you could also complement that with the issue of consent. The e-transaction proclamation states consent as something equal to signing a contract, right? So that's a key thing in the digital space. So maybe if you could address those two topics for me. Thank you.
So informed consent, identity theft, the combination of remote application, remote identity validation, those are key pieces to protect somebody's identity. And the reason why, if somebody cannot give a consent to make a transaction, purchase a goods or services, then the identity theft market is going to grow in Ethiopia or in the rest of Africa. For us, that's the area we focused in. And that's the area we work in. So if I take you guys about 8 years ago, just let me tell you guys a small story, how we started this thing. We were senior in college. I had to sign my financial aids, and I couldn't sign it. And I told my best friend that I know for 20 years, hey, can you please sign it? And he signed it and he submitted it. And a few hours later, I had $8,000 in my account. And I just realized how signature is total BS. Anybody can sign everybody's signature, and then it goes through. So what we did at Viditure, instead of signature, we did a video signature component. Basically, you have to agree to that specific contract. So it's basically I, Kebron Dekene, agree to document X in reference to giving power of attorney, to allowing this loan, anything can happen. So in terms of identity, currently your identity is basically on social media, on government database that are not protected that well. So how do we protect somebody's information or from an identity theft perspective? So instead of protecting the data and cornering the data, because currently you're posting everything in your life, why don't we protect the consentee? Whenever he consent, even if he has this gentleman right here, if he has my social security, my tax ID number, every information about my life, if he has to go on camera agreeing to a specific document, he doesn't want to commit fraud. So that protection comes from there. In terms of the general data verification or data storage, I classify it as the macro level infrastructure that the country requires. All the database, the cloud computing, the storage for all the what the private sector gathers and needs to be stored locally or regionally, or somehow this PI needs to stay in the country. When you take it further down to company policy in terms of how to protect data and what's the responsibility we have in order that data is secure, I believe the government needs to set a standard. For people that deal with PII, there should be a protocol which doesn't exist right now, because we try to ask, hey, what protocol are we following? What security level are we following for this type of data? That protocol is just on a theory level, not concrete and enforced. So by not enforcing this, basically, as earlier mentioned, a company can start today and have millions of PII next month. So if you can't understand the risk on that side, it's very dangerous. And third and last, what I want to emphasize is all the data that are collected by private sector government, we need to build, because the advantage we're starting from scratch, we need to build a predictive analytics where we see patterns of fraud and patterns of success and anomalies in terms of like where is the areas of fraud that can show up in the future. If we can, mine this data and understand this data, then we're going to learn it the hard way, like the West did, in terms of like millions of dollars of identity theft and consumer being harassed or everything that happened. So this is my 2 cents.
Thank you, Kebron. Maybe if we could also add, consumer protection, not only as a topic or as a concern, these private entities, private businesses, especially those engaged in digital economy, are supposed to incorporate into their business, but also, as an opportunity that they get engaged in, as also providing services to protect others as well.
So one of the projects that the opportunity side is huge, especially the identity market, is the beginning journey. So one of the projects that we're starting right now is called Wulata, and it's going to be digital contracts for any type of document signatures remotely. So if I need to sign a document from here to Bahar Dar, previously that was difficult to do. Our solution and the opportunity that Ethiopia offered, one is the lack that KYC exists, or the KYC availability is very limited. So at that point, biometric becomes critical in order to advance the economy. So by creating this digital signature platform to sign documents, number one is, as a company, we will do a lot of transaction, because just as simple as stats, Ethiopia has 120 million people. GCC combined, the whole Middle East is 56 million. So if we can get this country a little bit to a middle class and per capita, increase the revenue, you have a bigger market than the Middle East combined. So it's not a light market we're talking about. So that's an opportunity. But for the government, the enterprise, the banks, you can literally cut your sales cycle significantly. Let's say, for example, as a banker, if you're doing loan and it takes you about 45, 50 days, 50% of this waiting time is for the person to come and sign the document. Versus if you can send it digitally and validate the identity of that person and gives a clear consent, you can cut that cycle of business by 50%, which it takes it down to like 20, 15 days. So you multiply that across millions of transactions, the country can generate and gain about 50 to 60 days a year of new GDP growth in terms of by implementing just one simple solution. And there's volume there.
So, okay, you have received it. Yeah. So I'm going to move over to Muhidin, maybe. Having these standards, protocols, maybe solutions might be a good thing, but it's also important that the customer himself or herself knows about these things, and then also involved in protecting themselves to a certain extent as well. Maybe from a consumer education perspective, is ANB planning anything? Maybe either on its own, or maybe even in collaboration with the industry actors.
Yeah, dissemination of information to consumers really improves the effectiveness of supervisory activities on consumer protection. Also, dissemination of information, penalizes weak practice of consumer protection, and it creates an incentive for financial institutions to have good practice. And at the same time, you have to make sure that the information that you deliver in your website is in line with the rules of the prudential requirements, because sometimes you cannot disseminate very sensitive information that may deter other prudential regulations or objectives. So the first thing that we do is we have to, identify the type of information that is very relevant and important for the consumers. So, for example, you can disseminate the fraud situations, or the warning to consumers so that they be aware of the existing fraud circumstances. Or you can also disseminate the types of products and service providers to consumers. You can also disseminate tips to calculate the fees and costs of a particular financial product. And in my view, dissemination is very important in areas where the dynamism of the product is very complex, particularly in digital financial service and in non-bank financial institutions. Dissemination may be very important in that regard. But for the dissemination about the existing highly regulated financial institutions might not be very important, but we have to wait the advantage and disadvantage, and we are thinking of addressing these issues, and we are in the process of developing the websites of the NAB to disseminate. But at the same time, we also encourage financial institutions to disseminate very important information in unbiased manner, very objective information, so that they can compare the costs and fees of a particular product. And to help this, we developed the templates for key fact statements. That template is uniformly, applied all financial institutions to help consumers to compare products and services among financial institutions.
Thank you, Muhidin. Maybe I'll just ask two more questions and open up the floor for question and answer, maybe from the general audience. So one of the questions I have is for Mesfin. Hearing about Silver's presentation in the morning, do you see in any way these kinds of maybe pro bono or otherwise kind of legal services being provided to consumers for consumer protection purposes?
Yes, of course. Even though I don't classify lawyers as social engineers or social parasites, as you put it, I think before highlighting the role for lawyers, I just want to add something of importance over what the other colleagues said in terms of completing the legislative framework. There has been, what's conspicuously lacking is personal data protection proclamation. As you all know, this proclamation has been in draft for so many years. As long as I remember, it has been almost 10 years. And that's, many countries now, you could say over 160 countries, have drafted personal data protection proclamation modeled after the famous European Union GDPR legislation. You can really adapt it very easily to Ethiopia. That's kind of an umbrella proclamation that should be in place. Otherwise, that's why the legislation process itself should have a sequence in terms of what comes first, then followed by what. Now, what we have is a kind of micro-level regulation by directives. A very good directive, what you have talked about, but it's a very micro-level and very sector-specific regulation. So, again, if there are policymakers in the room, there is a draft, I know, sponsored by the Ministry of Innovation. I wish the State Minister was here. That should be really hastened and speeded up and really turned into a law. Having said that, to your question in terms of what roles lawyers can play, of course, there is a segment of consumers referred to as, in the various presentations, as vulnerable consumers. And this really, in the model that was followed, I think lawyers can provide pro bono services for especially vulnerable consumers, empowering them, giving them the option to pursue their rights. It's also important, lawyers can also, I see a role for lawyers to play a role in policy formulation by giving feedback. We come across many clients, multinational clients, mostly, who are providers of goods and services, as opposed to consumers. But you have so many allegations by consumers against these companies. So we have some insights into what problems are involved. I would also, what was referred to as digital literacy, working with various stakeholders, especially through the law firm associations, the bar association. I think there is a lot more role to play for lawyers.
My last question in this round would be for Francis. As you have actually touched upon it in your presentation in the morning, again in the earlier question as well. So as the platform economy broadens, we see the convergence of different entities into these platforms, right? So we're talking about the need for infrastructure and data, for the general consumer protection, specifically financial sector regulation and so on. So as this platform economy expands, these different jurisdictions are also starting to become coming together or overlapping, right? What sort of things have you done in your time as a Director General of the Kenyan Consumer Competition Authority? And what sort of tools, platforms you used, to bridge these gaps?
Maybe before I go to your question, I would like to take the baton from where my colleague has stopped regarding your earlier question. The other angle we need to realize is that the government cannot be everywhere at the same time. Is that we can build capacity for consumers to be their own first line of defense. For example, we can introduce under the curriculum of education consumer protection courses from young boys and girls in lower secondary, so that at least we can have that capacity for them to realize and appreciate the risks they face. The other line of defense is also the consumer lobby groups, working with the consumer lobby groups. So even the policies we are developing is that we should create some space for the consumer lobby groups. I know Silva is a lawyer. He would like, at the end of the day, he also like to take bread home. So the work he's doing cannot sustain him for long. But consumer lobby groups, through the rates consumers pay, they can be able to take this journey and to support the government in consumer protection interventions. Having said that, and in regard to the expansion of the platform economy and the digital economy and collapsing it into one, this is an ongoing discussion across the whole world. Do we need to break the roofs and the walls of regulators and create one big regulator to deal with all these challenges we are facing? And we have not concluded, but it's a discussion I'm really interested in, where also is that I'm seeing there could be some culture shocks where the national banks and the reserve banks naturally they are known to be conservative, but obviously is that they need to smell the coffee and see that there's a lot of market dynamisms so that they can join the train and move together. But also is that in terms of approach, and we were discussing at that table, I've seen it's more of personality rather than the regulations on managing the economy. For example, in the Reserve Bank of Kenya, we are talking about there was a previous regime which came up with very credible and consistent intervention, and then we had another regime which really focused on prudential and systemic failures. And when you focus more on prudential, you'll not see new economy coming into place. So also as we think of collapsing the economy, also collapsing the walls, we also need to change the culture. And sorry, my friend, thank you.
Maybe let's have some round of questions from the audience, and depending on time, we will also allow some questions for our earlier presenters as well. So maybe if you could show me hands, anyone with questions, but maybe I could direct the mics.
Good afternoon. My name is Ibrahim Zaidi. I was former director of COMESA Monetary Institute. Now I am a consultant. My question goes again. You discussed in depth the impact of digitalization in Kenyan economy. There are, however, a number of constraints to reduce digital divide between the rural and the urban areas. This include limited resources and the capacity constraints. What policies are in place in Kenya to address the two constraints? The second question is also to you. One of the goals that consumer protection tries to address is to promote fair competition. Since digitalization is mostly dominated by multinationals, Without adequate protection, these multinationals can engage in anti-competitive practices, which stifle smaller local business and limiting consumer choice. How did you address this in Kenya? Thank you very much.
First, what is FDS? Financial digital services, providing financial services digitally. The question is, to whom are we going to provide these services? Many speakers used to, raise like Ethiopia has over 120 million. Are we going to reach to this 120 million, given the illiteracy? The other thing is something related to with regulatories, law-related issues. We have been hearing a lot of frauds based on mobile phones from mobile banking end users. A lot of data and information were collected by our banks as well as Ethiopian Federal and Addis Ababa Federal Police. They said there is a lot of problems about information sharing between the bank as well as even the police organizations. A lot of victims who has lost hundreds of thousands of birr from their account cannot claim and get back their money. Who is going to take responsibility? Bank, the individual? And the recently introduced fuel payment with digital payment by Telebirr, Sibir, and the rest. People are telling us this is the most secured one, but I can envision and see that even the worst is about to come with regard to fraud behind that, because we are lacking way behind with regard to auditing aspects. I know people from auditing background can help me. We do have practices of auditing where we have received physical papers. But these transactions are going with electronic receipt, if at all that is considered as a receipt. How can we audit these transactions and mitigate potential risk?
I think if at all I got it right, there were two questions. One question was in regard to what the Kenyan government is doing regarding digital divide between maybe the urban areas and the rural areas. And then the other issue is that what the Kenyan government is doing regarding dominance and its ramifications to the economy. And proceeding from my understanding is that the digital divide can be caused by, one, lack of towers, that is communication towers, them being located in the developed urban areas, and the rural areas, they are not developed. Number two, the digital divide may be occasioned by the affordability and the accessibility of smartphones vis-a-vis features phones between the urban areas and the rural areas due to income disparities. And number three, it can be occasioned by literacy, that the people in the rural areas may not be able to deal with or to interact with the digital economy, even if they have been bought smartphones by their children. I think those are the three key areas. And how has the government of Kenya addressed that? One, it's in regard to the communication towers, is that these days, there's a separation of the service providers and the towers owners. And therefore, you can enter into the business of mobile network operators, but you don't own the towers. And if at all you own the towers, there are regulations for sharing and co-locating those towers. From my own intel, I know in Ethiopia there's such a regulation, but how it is being implemented on the ground, in Kenya we say the ground might be different. So how it's being implemented, it might be different because the incumbent owns towers, and I don't know whether he is ready to release those towers to the person who has entered. So that co-location is very key in minimizing that digital divide. The other way is what we call Universal Service Obligation Fund, that the MNOs is that they are required to, they are given a fund to be able to expand to the areas which cannot be commercially viable to provide. And that is what I would request the policymakers in this Ethiopian government to consider to minimize that digital divide. And for that matter, in Kenya, you realize the number of SIM cards are more than even the population. Even in my house, you find that even very young people, they have the mobile phones. So that is how the Kenyan government has addressed that. In terms of dominance, let me indicate that dominance is not illegal per se. It's how you behave when you have that dominance. Are you abusing it? And it's true that there are some dominant firms in Kenya, but if at all the market is contestable, it can allow, there are no high barriers to entry. I know when one firm, taxi firm, Uber came into the market, there was a lot of people fighting it. And now in Kenya, we have Uber, we have Bolt, we have Yego, which came the other day from Rwanda. And also in the other towns like Nakuru, we have other upcomings like Wasini. So if the market is contestable, then dominance is not an illegality. But I totally agree with the person who has asked the question that there's a way a market can tip, M-Pesa transfers in Kenya. I think the market has tipped, and there's no way we can do it. Now there's no contestant who can come and be able to crowd back the dominance of Safaricom. And also the platforms across the whole world, Google and Facebook, that kind of dominance. There's some thoughts we are having. Do we require to bring on board what we call ex-ante regulation coupled with ex-post regulations? Ex-ante is that you are regulating like if it's a utility because of it is an essential facility in running the economy, and then ex-post in terms of its behavior. There's a discussion which is going across the whole world. We have not converged our position in regard to what I had mentioned earlier, superior bargaining position of these platforms. Can we reach a point where we say that we are going to control the prices, to regulate the prices they are charging our SMEs in terms of delivering their services? So the other angle is that also within the African continent, I know the regulators are sitting down and agreeing to form a critical mass of how to regulate these Northern Hemisphere platforms so that you don't make your country less competitive by chasing Google away when Kenya is making their country, telling Google, you come. I tell you, even if Google is abusing its dominance here, and as a regulator, you throw it away of this country, you'll be the most unpopular person in Ethiopia. So there's this angle where there's African way of looking at things, and then we level the approach and build a critical mass. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Service. Well, we have developed the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, and we have also another strategy, which is the National Digital Payment Strategy. So you can have access to those strategies. And so in both strategies, our target groups are the youths, women, and rural adults. Because the gender gap in Ethiopia is more than 20%. So we have specific initiatives to close those gaps, and we have also identified approach how we close those gender gap. So the first thing is we assess the barriers which limits women to access financial service. And we came up with recommendations and waiting for the endorsement of the government. In that recommendation, there are a lot of stakeholders who work together to improve the digital financial service to women. And we have also a program for the regional financial inclusion. There is also a huge gap among regions in terms of financial inclusion. So the means to close this financial inclusion gap is digital financial service. So the most important thing that we are thinking of is using agents and access points in regions to create business case for financial institutions and agents so as to reduce the cost of providing these services to rural people. And we have also literacy and education campaigns in the regions. So you can refer to those documents so that you can have a picture of how we are going to reach those target groups.
Thank you, Muhidin. Noting Mesfin's broader questions and topics that were not mentioned here, just to give you a context, the general digital financial services topic is very broad. Even the particular topic of consumer protection is very broad, even to be able to address or discuss about all the issues here. So we have tried to put together some experiences from which we could learn, and this is what this platform is about. Hopefully we'll get to also address some of the topics you mentioned in maybe our next knowledge series. So in that, maybe I can go back to another round of question and answer from the general audience.
My name is Magdalene Taye. I came from Magdalene and Associates Law Office, and I'm a lawyer in investment in the energy sector. My question goes to Mr. Kebron. As you said, you're working in the digital platform systems to developing in Ethiopia. So as we know, more Ethiopian people are living in the rural area and they don't have internet access, even if most of them have not having electricity. So what do you think about this issue and to addressing your digital platforms in the digital market to the rural areas, especially for the farmers, because they take loans from the banks, and you said that you have a system to digital signature. So what's your insight on this? Thank you.
My name is Ndasho from UNCDF. My question is directed to all. Anyone can comment on it, but mainly goes to Mr. Mesfin. With respect to consumer protection, there is an issue of mandate where multiple institutions are struggling or maybe fighting over it. Ministry of Innovation has its component, National Bank of Ethiopia, the same, Ministry of Trade, and also even there is a consumer protection authority that's fully engaged with consumers' compliance. So from these aspects, maybe what is the learning from other countries, but within Ethiopia, who should be responsible for such actions, and also coordinating the activity between different ministerial agencies so that the issue at hand, which is protecting the consumers, is not falling behind. Thank you.
My name is El Shaddai, and I come from a management consultancy company called Chemcom here in Addis Ababa. My question goes to Ato Mesfin and another one to Francis. With regards to the issue of consumer protection, a key part of indicating confidence in consumers in any process is their ability to file a suit in case of any violations of consumer protection in a court of law. Based on your experience, what has been the performance of the Ethiopian legal system in ensuring this consumer protection? And what is the volume of the issues that have been left unaddressed? The second question to Mr. Kariuki. Based on the Kenyan experience again, and on the power of prosecutorial duty, what has been the experience of landmark cases that have come against potential violators, whether they are companies involved in DFS, telcos, other service providers in the digital economy, and what were the key lessons during these cases that came forward? Thank you.
So in the flow of the questions arrival, let's try to address this following the same. So let's start with Kebron and then Mesfin.
I see it more as an opportunity than a challenge. From our past experience, the literacy issue that was raised prior and the rural internet issue and also literacy that also goes there, to reach services across those markets is not easy at first. But what we've done in the past, we started with, for example, we built remote power of attorney for the diaspora market. We built passport and yellow card services for the global diaspora market. The biggest issue we saw, number one, is trust in this community that the service works. Second is literacy and know how to apply. So because of those challenges, what we have done is build an infrastructure of support center within our community, the Ethiopian businesses, the Ethiopian printing, tax offices, the lady that sells spices. We started teaching a lot of those people on how to use the technology and be part of our business model. So if it's incorporated part of the business to educate and use a little bit better educated group of people to support a bigger pool that has never been exposed to technology, then the convenience will force the users to come to the technology. For example, let me give you one example. In order to transact from here to Afar or to give power of attorney to somebody in Addis Ababa, you really have to take a bus, come here, go to Wulna Masraja, and conduct that business. If the digital service to give power of attorney is available there, even the person doesn't speak, he'd rather pay an extra 100 birr, 200 birr for the service and get it done there. So it's more a job creation opportunity that I see it as, because we cannot resist. The other example I want to give, that was 2 weeks ago, my mom called me, and I have an electric car, so she said, let's switch car, even though her car is better, because they told her to use Telebr to pump gas, and she doesn't want to deal with it. So, but she was forced to get into it, and now she is accepting it. The other thing on the digital contract side, yes, the same technology that I described earlier in terms of the video signature, the education would come with the request. So for example, if I send you a document to sign, basically the how-to video is going to be attached to it. It's going to force you to look at that first and educate the consumer. The biggest money that we're putting in terms of in this product is not as much as the technology side, because technology we've built it before. It's the consumer behavior change and the court system, the government, the clientele. And even people in Ethiopia, if you sign it in front of me, they still want 3 witnesses, even though we are signing next to each other. But for those reasons, remote signature, the mindset needs to change. So we're spending a lot of marketing dollars to educate the population and to show the convenience. So the only thing people that are in Addis, we only think business in Addis. But inter-country operability doesn't exist in Ethiopia. That's why business is slow. So if it's digital signature, you can have a factory in Dredwa. The board member can be all across the, Addis Ababa, Mekelle, Bahar Dar, and then some in China. Those things can be conducted and can do business faster. And I feel like, I think it's an opportunity to educate and to create jobs versus a problem for us.
I think two questions are addressed to me. They are related, actually. The first one is, given that there are so many different institutions tasked with the obligation to protect consumers under different settings, what's ideal? I think from my perspective, I think the first thing I would like to highlight is it must be noted that it's a collaborative effort. Even civil society, the courts, all players need to play their role. Having said that, if you look at different jurisdictions, they have one kind of super organization dealing with consumer protections in particular. You can take, for example, the National Consumer Commission of South Africa. You have Competition Authority, Kenya. We used to have one. And you have Consumer Financial Protection Bureau of the United States. You have one agency dealing with consumer protection, initiating policies, coordinating all the various sectoral consumer protection entities. So now, we kind of go backwards by eliminating one institution we had. Now everyone takes the issue from their sectoral perspective. So my recommendation, for government would be to really reestablish the Consumer Protection Authority, empower it, educate people, train people in the long term. It will be a very good organization. Of course, National Bank takes care of digital financial consumers, and everyone has their slots, their turf. But you have one institution. I think that's very necessary. In addition to the roles other play, including civil society, empowering consumers, as noted by Francis earlier. So that's my take on that question. With respect to really how the Ethiopian legal system is really coping with this emergent and developing, everyday unfolding dynamic situation, from my experience, it's really dismal. It's not really coping very well. I had a number of clients who had been having this kind of problem, and when we take it to the police, first of all, they have to do what's called a forensic audit, to establish even what the problem is, to take to the police. What's the nature of the crime? So you have that difficulty. It takes months, even engaging the best, probably one of the 4 consultancy, financial agency, consultancy services, the big 4, they take a long time to establish even what went wrong, because it's getting sophisticated. Then you take that finding to the police, because you have to go to the police to take it before you take it to the prosecutor and the court. The police a different story. Even explaining it, understanding, that kind of report, big report, is very, very challenging. And the police has all sorts of criminal offenses to deal with, from petty theft to big crimes, and they have their own focus. So you have problem there. Then you take it to court. Judges are like anybody else. They are new to this development, and examining this and providing solution takes a long time. So sometimes you just pray that this doesn't happen to you. And in terms of, but I think in terms of completeness of the legal system, I want to go back to this personal data protection law that should be in place. Otherwise, if you look at the various legislations, they really have interesting provisions dealing with consumer protection. Just to give you an example, the e-transaction, the electronic transaction proclamation actually says in one place, in a typical transaction, you cannot choose foreign law. For example, if you say English law is applicable for that transaction, if it's an electronic transaction, that's illegal. The law just ignores it and applies Ethiopian law. But if English law has a better protection, it applies English law. So it's very selective. And when you look at how would you implement a cross-border trade in this kind of protection is another question. But you have interesting provisions which try to over-regulate the space and really go a long way to protect consumers. The question is not lack of substantive rules, other than my comment on the personal data protection legislation. So the question is to be able to implement those, to train law enforcement officials at different levels, to train them, to educate them how to resolve these kind of issues. That's my take.
Thank you. I think the question was in regard to jurisprudence in regard to consumer protection cases in Kenya. There's an interesting thing. I've seen Kenyans are very litigious people, but unfortunately, I always wonder when it comes to litigation against the corporates, we don't have visible jurisprudence. They usually focus on political decisions rather than their rights against the corporates. But I may appreciate why we have not had serious jurisprudence in regard to this. One is that my colleague said, Lucy, when you go to report that you have been scammed, the police will laugh at you. So, you seem stupid. So that could be one of the reasons. Then number two is that what you have been scammed, as Silva said, $2, people may see that it's a useless, money you have been scammed. The number three, which is very, very critical in regard to the Competition Law and Consumer Protection Act in Kenya, it's the powers which were donated by Parliament to the competition agency, which also deals with consumer protection to some extent, is that Parliament decided not to give the competition agency what lawyers call sumoto powers, that authority cannot investigate at its own volition. So people have to come and complain. And when they come to complain, also Parliament crafted the law that it is more of solving the problem rather than escalating it to the judiciary, because maybe Parliament wanted to be a bit to temper the powers, because even consumer protection issues, they have some contractual or obligations. I'm just trying to think why Parliament thought to temper the powers of the agency. And when they come to the authority, the first thing is the authority to call the person who has offended the consumer and tell them to make good of the offense. And out of this, I've seen corporates, when they are called, they are contacted by the agencies, they are so much aware of the reputational risk and they have been able to solve 386 consumer cases across the sectors. Now, most of the cases now we are seeing it in the financial sector, and banks are risk averse. When you call a bank and say that you have this challenge, is that they always settle the matter. So we have not seen matters being escalated to the judiciary. And I think also that is a good way of solving matters, because also the people who are being scammed, they don't have the economic capacity to be able to go through the whole judicial rigmaroles. Also, there's a Consumer Protection Act in Kenya which can support class action, but the challenge is that we have not seen credible consumer lobby groups, which they are more of a, sorry to use the term, briefcase consumer lobby groups, rather than entrenched in what they want to do for the consumers. So that's my take on that.
So we have talked about regulation, policy, the need for collaboration and harmonization. We have also talked about maybe technical standards, protocols, and innovation in that area as well. We also talked about consumer protection and the need for education as well. So maybe as a closing, Muhidin, maybe my last question to you is, how ready do you think we are to handle the risks that would come from increased digitization in Ethiopia, especially in the financial sector?
Yeah, thank you. So one thing that we are considering is strengthening our supervisory and regulatory capacity to make it based on the international standards and principles. And we should also encourage financial institutions to have strong risk mitigation techniques to address the consumer protection risks. So, one area that we see a problem is most financial institutions, do not have the compliance handling unit. So, in ideal situations, we want all complaints to be resolved at the premises of the financial institutions. So the National Bank has to ensure that they have an independent, internal dispute resolution mechanisms with, sufficient logistics capacity and human resource, so that, the number of complaints coming to the financial institutions will be resolved, reduced, and the National Bank, with limited resource, has been able to focus on other significant risk areas. So what we are doing is we try to benchmark international experiences. The number of financial institutions increasing year after year, and we are also expecting the entrance of foreign financial institutions. So we are building our regulatory and supervisory capacity to accept these risks and the situation.
Thank you, Muhidin, for that point. So with this, we'll finalize our panel session here.
For all the panelists, please. It's an indicative of how important the topic is, that you all have patiently been listening into all these discussions. There's so much to be done, and I just wanted to highlight one element that Kebron earlier indicated. So we have a population of just about 120 million, and by 2050, this is going to double, right? So the next 26, 27 years. I was saying the other day, and I'll say it again, one person in Africa out of 10 will be an Ethiopian by 2050. So just consider the enormity of the market opportunity. So if we design the marketplace in a way that it can protect the consumer, this can be a dynamite market in the next 20, 30 years. So there's enormous opportunity for the private sector to really thrive in this space, in the digital economy. But we need to design it together. Let's not just expect the perfect rules to be defined from the government and where everything is going to be nice and easy. It's not going to be like that. We must chip in as a private sector. We must chip in as actors in the ecosystem. We must chip in as academicians. Everybody must chip in to make it work for us. And for the youth population, we have 70% under the age of 70, right? So the opportunity to innovate for this space is enormous. So once again, thank you so much for being here. I think one more round of applause for my panelists. Thank you so much, Raf and everybody else. And for all of you for being here so far.